always a pleasure for me and the monks from Drepung Losling Monastery to be here at the Aspen Museum of Art and with the Aspen community, really. We have been coming here in Aspen for many years now and at the museum for the last couple of years. And we really look forward to the week that we are here. The mandala that you have had a chance to see in making, it has quite a rich spiritual and philosophical kind of symbolism and meaning, and I'm sure that some of you are quite familiar with this particular art form, but I'm going to assume that you don't know much, and I'm just going to make my presentation to those who don't have a whole lot of understanding about Tibetan Buddhism, but also particularly with the mandala. It's wonderful to see it. There's some faces are familiar, and actually it's really wonderful to see one of my students from one of our summer programs in India. It's such a nice coincidence. It's wonderful to see you, Anin. So the mandala is, where is this particular one, as you can see, in the center, there is a Buddha holding this wisdom sword, and this is the Buddha referred to as Manjushri. Youthful glory, if you will, and it represents wisdom. Now, mandala, of course, is a Sanskrit term. It's a very ancient form of art, but even before the art, the mandala in India, was associated with certain philosophical concepts. So from the very term, which is translated as kilkor in Tibetan, which means center and the surrounding. Now, or just simply as a circle. That has a certain philosophical and spiritual meaning in the Indian, ancient Indian context, which Tibetan Buddhism is, the form of kind of spiritual tradition that has been imported from India. A circle can be, we can talk about the circle of families, circle of people, that always when we think of circle of people, family, there are some in the center, like the parents in the center and the children and other, members of the family or in the community, that they could be like the mayor in Aspen, and then you have all the other dignitaries, the officials, and the people, and so forth. In the ancient India, philosophically speaking, this concept was taken to understand the very kind of nature of our existence in the larger cosmos. How do we understand our place in our existence? So center in this particular system became the center where we are, our own kind of world system, if you will. And then the surrounding becomes all the other galaxies and the constellations and so forth and so on. This is not necessarily that old a concept, but this is actually from around 9th, 10th centuries. There was a particular form of practice in Buddhist tantric tradition that came to be known as Kala Chakra, the wheel of time, and that refers to at different levels, the internal wheel, external wheel, and alternative wheels, and external wheels refer to, and the time and the wheel refer to the constellations. That when we think about the time, time has a psychological dimension. Time has, you may call some physical dimension also, that if you think about our Earth, how many days it takes for the Earth to rotate around, and then that kind of makes a year, and then that is broken into the 12, and the Moon, how long it takes to rotate around the Earth, and then that becomes a 1 day and night cycle, and so that kind of time is quite kind of fixed in certain ways. But then the psychological time, the psychological time is very flexible. If you are very interested in certain tasks, time goes, flies by. If you are engaged in some kind of task that's really boring that you don't want to do, 5 minutes may seem like an hour. So that's a kind of the. But in terms of the time here, external time refers to those planets and constellations and so forth and so on. And then but to understand that, you have to have a center, and that the center becomes our world system. Similarly, even before that, then the ancient Indian tradition understood the relationship between our own internal dimension, or the mind, what we may call consciousness, and what is the external dimension, that the whole universe or the universes and so forth. There is a very direct correlation between the two. In other words, our mental state, mental emotional states, in many ways determine what kind of external worlds that will kind of unfold. Of course, this is based on a tradition that believes in previous lives, that the kind of time in the cyclical context, not a linear, and also as one individual also has many lives in the past, like there is no beginning to our life for each individual, not just for humans, for cockroach and other insects and so forth. So in that context, when you think of the impact of our own mind, the consciousness, and the actions that we engage, that informed by our emotions and the mental states, these inform what kind of collective with this collective, what may be known as consciousness, karma, or karma. With the collective karma, what kind of worlds will unfold in the future that we become part of it? And this is a very ancient kind of the system where the ordinary existence, not of the existence where beings are now liberated or free from certain kind of ignorance and certain kind of destructive emotions, the way they are liberated, they are free from such cycle of death and rebirth and so forth. But when beings are still in this samsara, what is kind of can be understood as a continuous cycle of death and rebirth, characterized by the various forms of suffering or dissatisfaction, that is understood in three realms, what is known as desire realm, form realm, and the formless realms. Of the three, the desire realm itself is the realm of like humans, the animals, and yes, in the ancient, the Indian traditions, and then to this day, yes, Tibetan Buddhist tradition also, that's maintained. There are other life forms other than humans and the animals, that they may be understood as, in some cases we understand as the realm of spirits and even the hell realms and so forth. So those are the kind of the realm known as the desire realm, where beings are very much under influence of certain kind of desires. The desires kind of rule our lives, that we have certain kind of influences on our daily actions and so forth that are informed by certain cravings and so forth. That's not to say that that's all it is, that in this life we also have incredible intelligence. In any of the life forms, it is maintained that individuals have the capacity to reshape one's own mental states, so therefore to change the course of one's life. But generally speaking, desire realm is a kind of realm where the coarse states of mind are in operation, but one can cultivate certain inner states of samadhi or concentrations, the meditative states, by which one has greater control over one's afflictive or destructive emotions and impulses, instincts, and so forth. So that therefore that your mental states are more stable, more clear, and greater degree of peace and the concentration that one has. Attaining certain level of such samadhi that one that will inform our actions, physical and verbal, attitudinal actions, intentional actions, and so forth. But then that's what is believed to lead into the next realm, known as the rupa, or the form realm. That realm is exclusively the realm of gods. That there are many levels there, as you can see. These are all the realms of the gods. That 16 or 17, depending on the last realm, as known as Aganishta, that Homin in Tibetan, whether you count that as one of the, that is certainly the realm of form, but it's not necessarily the realm of samsara, cyclic existence. So the beings there can be those who have transcended the cycle of samsara. But then above that would be then the formless realm, that arupa, dhatu, the formless realm. That formless realm obviously has no physical dimension, coarse physical dimension to it. But the idea here is that the connection between our own mental states and what unfolds externally. To some extent, we know that if, I'm very agitated, I'm very kind of self-centered and really kind of bitter, that will create the immediate impact my immediate circle also, right? If I'm very crabby, that always kind of insulting and the abusive kind of language and so forth that I'm engaging with, of course that will kind of poison and charge the atmosphere around with that poison, and it will affect the quality of the air, the atmosphere around, and the other people's mental states and so forth. So, but this part is taken to a little further. Not only the immediate atmosphere, but even our future. What holds for us in the future also depends on what kind of mental state we have now. Assuming that this is, the future. Assuming that future exists, which the Buddhist tradition certainly maintains, the life after and so forth. So this comes from this ancient tradition. In the mandalas that we see now, that it's not only in Buddhist, actually Hindu tradition also has it, but it's in Tantric Buddhist tradition. You find the most kind of this, elaborate forms of mandalas and the practices, the meditations associated with the mandalas, and this belong to Tantric Buddhist tradition. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Buddhism, Buddhism is a very complex and vast tradition, even though it is grounded in very basic, very pragmatic principles that simply has to do with there is suffering, that there are certain level of dissatisfaction in our lives, but this dissatisfaction or the suffering have cause and conditions. And besides external causes and conditions, primary cause and conditions also we can trace to our own attitudes, our own habits, our own kind of the, behavioral and attitudinal, emotional patterns. So therefore, the suffering has its cause and conditions. Those cause and conditions, afflictive emotions, afflictive action or the behaviors, destructive behaviors, they are grounded in ignorance, the basic distortion of the mind that is not able to fully align with the reality of the, the nature of the reality, that the way the things, the phenomena we, others actually are. Put simply, that means that our tendency to fixate or to grasp to a fixed identity as me, as something that, as if it exists independently or objectively, kind of sort of fixed manner, and for that purpose, everything else to exist in a context-free, independent, objective manner, that is seen as the ignorance, fundamental ignorance that becomes the source of various afflictive emotions, actions, and so forth. So, but ignorance has no kind of grounding in reality. So therefore, that it's a distortion, and therefore this can be transformed by cultivating wisdom or understanding, intelligence, awareness that is more in line with the reality. And that's the wisdom, the Buddha wisdom that we will be talking about, is the embodiment of that basic wisdom. That means that causes of suffering can be transformed, and that's the cessation of the, not only the causes that lead to the cessation or end to the suffering, but to do that you need to apply path or the certain means to bring about the transformation, which basically falls into three basic, what are known as the shikshas, or the training, the ethics, certain degree of concentration of this, of the mind, and then the wisdom, the understanding. Now, that is the kind of the basic foundation of Buddhism. But within that, Buddhist tradition is quite vast, where there are three approaches known as yanas. The one would be understanding this. One can primarily focus on transforming one's own ignorance and the other afflictive emotions and actions, thereby that one can become free from this constant cycle of suffering, death and rebirth and the suffering. Or one can attune to other living beings and be able to relate to them also, by attuning to our common humanity, if you will, that seeing that how we are all interdependent, interrelated, and all want to be happy and to be free from suffering, thereby, greater capacity for empathy and compassion for others, where one's focus can become the well-being of others. So much so that one can commit oneself to pursuing one's Buddhahood or the full awakening in order to help other beings. That is known as the universal approach, or the Mahayana. And then there is the Tantric, or the Vajrayana, that the approach or the vehicle, the diamond vehicle it is referred to. That has to do with, if the ignorance is the basis of our suffering, then that what is the ultimate reality? And that from this approach, it takes into account that each and every one of us, our fundamental, primordial nature of our being is consciousness. And that is consciousness and energy, if you will, lungsam, that in Tibetan. And in its primordial, authentic nature, it has never been corrupted. It can never be corrupted. It is pure. So therefore, it's divine. So each and every living being, at its authentic state, that is shares that divine nature. But there are beings who have, by transforming negativities and so forth, have actualized the divine nature. So we can say that we have the seed for that divinity, but in order to bring that into full fruition, we need to transform the layers, the veils of ignorance and afflictive emotions and so forth. But the Tantric Buddhist tradition provides the paths, the methods and so forth in powerful way to access that reality now through the ways of visualization, imagination, utilizing our, the power of visualization. So that's where the Tantric Buddhism, where the mandalas are used in one way as the visual aid to understand our own reality. Here, the center becomes the central deity here. That is, for example, here it is the Buddha of compassion. It can be Buddha of wisdom. That is to say, the enlightened state of the mind is complete with all the positive qualities: love, compassion, wisdom, generosity, and so forth. So therefore, enlightened state of mind can manifest in the physical form in countless different forms, and in particularly embodying certain qualities of enlightenment, like the quality of wisdom as Manjushri. That also can come in many forms. Compassion, like the Avalokiteshvara in this case, and that can also come in many forms. So center becomes that central principle, enlightened principle, or the quality, and the surrounding then becomes that from such a state of mind, what would what would the surrounding be? If you have see through that lens, what would the surrounding be? A being embodying such a quality, what would one's body be like? What would one other processes like the perceptions and the emotions and so forth and so on be like? So in that way, here the center becomes the central deity, perhaps a circle of other deities around it, and that there is the mansion, that this is the mansion, the square mansion with the gates. And then this is the ground, and then there are three circles here of lotus, the vajra, and the wisdom flames. That's the surrounding. So in that sense, mandala is a divine world of deities as the resident mandala, or the beings, and the surrounding as the residents and the beyond. So that's the understanding here. As I mentioned, that the enlightened state can manifest in many forms. Like this is the Tara, the mother of all the beings. In the sense, Tara also represents the wisdom. The wisdom can manifest in female form, like the Tara, as the wisdom is the source of enlightenment, and therefore the mother of all the Buddhas. Manjushri, as I mentioned earlier, the wisdom often depicted in this form, but also they can come in many forms. Mandala upstairs that the monks are making is of the Manjushri. That's the Avalokiteshvara. Vajrapani, this has to do with the proficiency, the power, the efficiency. The enlightened state is also not a kind of the passive state. It's a vibrant state. So since at the center of an enlightened being is about the well-being of others, and therefore that how you bring about well-being requires a certain abilities and so forth that can manifest as this form. Mandalas can be done in many forms, not only with this colored sand. They can be drawn on canvas with the watercolors and so forth like that. This is called the retiki kilkor, or the mandalas drawn on canvas. They can, of course, be made with the sand, as you can see upstairs. They can even be in three-dimensional forms, made of wood, or in some cases, Tibetan Buddhism is a really that takes great pride in making it as aesthetically as beautiful as possible. So sometimes it's even made with gold and silver and like that, the three-dimensional form where you can see, what you were seeing earlier, the sand mandala in the three-dimensional form, like this form, that looking from the top, this would be like this with the roof, and then inside, this is the gate, this was the entrance, the leading to the gate here. So to all four sides, you have entrances, and then inside the deities. Mandalas can be visualized, called the Samtengikil, called the concentration mandala, because it's utilized extensively for the meditation purpose, and in which you visualize yourself actually in the center as the deity with the all the mandalas around, or you can visualize a deity in the front, in the space, like this person is doing. And then now the mandalas can be made in the digital forms, that is today's technology. Now, as I mentioned that the use of mandala or understanding of mandala is in Buddhist tradition, it is a very, there is an extensive and profound kind of the meaning behind the mandalas. Now, in that sense, what you see mandala is to see this as a roadmap towards one's own awakening or the Buddhahood, enlightenment. So in that way, each feature in the mandala stands for a certain psychological, spiritual principle or the qualities, that qualities that transform the various layers of our afflictive states. And therefore that if you have completely, unveiled, remove all the veils of our ignorance and distortions and so forth and so on, then you are who you are, the enlightened being, right? So in that sense, you can understand mandalas as the roadmap or as the standing for the various processes by which you incorporate within your own psychological states, mental states, as a way to transform those the afflicted states. Can be understood in two parts, known as common path and the unique tantric path. That as I was mentioning, the Buddhism has various approaches. Common refers to the approaches that are common to both tantric and non-tantric forms of Buddhism. Here, seeing the mandala as the path towards enlightenment, that there we can understand those three rings, the three concentric rings, the fire, the vajra, and the lotus. These three, they refer to they represent what is known as the three principles to the path of enlightenment. What are the kind of the basic, transformation we need to bring about? Number one, we have to develop a certain degree of freedom from our clingings, these constant cravings, that obsessive cravings, you can say, whether it is for name, the fame, the glory, pleasure, whatever. It's not that the name, the glory, the possessions and so forth are not useful, but the obsession to them can be, very uncomfortable, can lead to all kinds of conflicts and so forth. And so therefore that the first principle here is about how to cultivate this capacity to be not stuck in this obsessive, habit of these cravings, the obsession. So that's why the lotus, it actually grows in the mud, and it gives its full bloom above the mud, unstained by the faults of the mud. So in that sense, this letting go or the not being stuck in this obsession is like, that the blooming of the lotus, the unstained by those obsessive kind of flaws of obsessions. The second ring is the of Vajra. You will see what it looks like a little bit later, but it represents the bodhicitta in Buddhism, which has to do with this altruistic, extraordinary altruistic attitude, the intention, that is totally other-oriented, oriented towards other well-being, not about oriented towards, selfishness. It's not that we don't need, we have self-interest. We have to pay attention to our self-interest, but the self-centeredness is different than paying attention to self-interest. Self-interest can be an enlightened self-interest. We do need to pay attention to self-interest, but when it becomes excessively self-focused, that itself can become the source of various emotional unhappiness and the conflicts and so forth and so on. So therefore, the bodhicitta is totally other-oriented, this altruistic attitude, extraordinary attitude where one resolves to attain full awakening to help all beings. That is captured by Vajra, and the Vajra, as they're sometimes kind of translated as diamond. Diamond is very strong. That the same thing. The Vajra is strong. What good heart or the compassion is, our ultimate protection. So in that sense, it stands for that. And then the wisdom flames. Wisdom, this outer ring, that stands for the perfect view of reality. That is the wisdom, understanding our own reality as it is, that unmistakenly. They're interconnected, interdependent, and there's devoid of any fixed, concrete, independent kind of essence or the core. But rather, our own reality is utterly, conceptually constructed and dependent, and it created in the context, in the relation of cause and condition, and so forth. So that is the wisdom in Buddhist tradition that one would ultimately want to cultivate. Now, so the lotus and so forth, as I mentioned, I already mentioned lotus, letting go, the Vajra, that has to do with the altruistic heart of compassion, and then the flame, the perfect view, that is the wisdom. Now, in reality, that the Vajra, that this little kind of string that you are seeing, actually, this is visualized in actual practice like a dome, but made of, this whole thing made of the Vajras. And the Vajra, that particular scepter, understood as kind of impenetrable, and that here it has to do impenetrable by this psychological and other obstacles and so forth. So that the dome, the Vajras, as you can see, those little, it's made of those. The fire, the wisdom fire that you were seeing, the wisdom, it's actually seen outside, like the whole flames of wisdom outside that dome. Unfortunately, for some reason, this thing has kind of not showing the image properly, but if you can visualize this thing, whole thing up here like this, a triangle like this. That is called the Dharmodya, the reality source. It's a womb of creation. Womb meaning that wisdom itself. And in this case, the wisdom stands for an understanding that is in tune with the actual reality of as any given entity, like ourselves and so forth, where they come from, and the results, all understood in the context of interdependence and not as a fixed. That's what is referred to entityless, signless, wishlessness, basically to... so the way that here, one understands this is that about cultivating the fully enlightened state has to take into account the need for cultivating the mind of letting go, like the greater degree of letting go, greater degree of compassion, if you will, and then greater understanding into the reality, that the wisdom. And in the ultimate sense, it's that understanding, wisdom, that becomes the very source of our transformation. So therefore, in the Tantras, the whole, those deities, the central deity and all the deities as you saw, they are understood as grounded in that wisdom. It's the wisdom that leads to the attaining the fully enlightened states. There are the various ways that you can understand, like the Vajras, as you see that whole mention here is sitting on the lotus, that was kind of the, and then this lotus grows in in this triangle shape, that is the wisdom. From the wisdom, the letting go of the ability to let go, and then from there, the further understanding into the reality in many different perspectives, and then grounded in that, then you can see eventual kind of unfolding of the enlightened state. So the lotus we already talked about. Even these are 5 spokes, like 2 here, 2 there, and in the center. Then to each side, the 5 spokes, makes 20. That represents something called the 20 ways we can misunderstand ourselves. Transcending of those misconceptions. The 4 sides of the mentioned, like this is east, west, south, north. They are actually in the equal dimensions. It's like the square shape. On the one hand, it represents every kind of the one nature of all the phenomena, like that every phenomenon is dependently existing. But also it represents what, as I mentioned earlier, the 4 basic truths. Entrances represent the purification of the certain, what are kind of, in a more simple terms, referred to as mindfulness of body, of sensations, of mental states, and all phenomena. That has to do with, mindfulness has to do with here, understanding our body in the proper context, sensations the way they are without blind attachment, aversions, and so forth. Same thing, the whole host of other mental events, all kind of emotional states and so forth. But the whole world that we live in, that everything to be understood also in this context of interdependence, and then maintaining that vision, that understanding in one mind is what is called the mindfulness. The mindfulness meaning retaining a certain perspective in your mind, and that has to do with perspective of the body. There can be many different aspects to our body, but ultimately it is impermanent, changing moment by moment, and then also ultimately speaking, there is not a fixed core. And the same thing, the sensation, whether pleasant, unpleasant, they come and go, not fixed in a kind of time and space or in a moment. The same thing, various emotions and whole phenomena. The 4 porticos here, we don't see it here, but in the mandala, outside the gate, there are 4 porticos, and they represent the 4 the levels of concentrations, the different degrees of samadhi or the meditative states, and then the mandala. If you could see, all kinds of different ornaments, wheels and the flags and all kind of the pearls and jewels. These represent the various ways, various resources that bring about the fulfillment of our the mind and our lives. So those are some of the meaning. The mandalas are also very colorful. That you can see that at least that there are 5 basic colors: like white, the yellow, red, green, and blue. And these colors, in one way, we can say that they represent the 5 activities or the 5 functions of the mind or the being, that you can function out of compassion to how to bring about help to others in a peaceful way. That you need to have a certain level of kind of enhanced activities. You need to have certain degree of intensity or the force. And then, that you do need to have this certain degree to convince others, but also the all-rounded activities, what I refer to as the 5 activities. Also, the 5 color walls in the mandala, that if these are the walls with the gates, the entrances, there are 5 layers. That here the red and the yellow, white, blue and green. These are 5 transparent walls of the mansion, and they represent what are known as the 5 wisdoms. We think of if we are living beings, ultimately, if you think of us as beings, our identity kind of conceptually constructed in dependence upon the various the processes upon which we designate our identity, like we have body, sensations, and so forth and so on. But ultimately, they come down to energy mind. When it comes to the mind, we can understand in form of like there are, among others, like the 5 basic emotions. They can, in its pure form, there are 5 wisdoms. So when you relate to this in it, from a certain distortive state, there are destructive emotions like the hatred or the, desire, attached, afflictive desires and jealousy and so forth and so on. But in its pure form, and there are 5 wisdoms. So this represents kind of those pure wisdoms. In the center of the mandala, in some forms, as you saw, there were actual Buddhas drawn, in the center and the 4 cardinal directions. Here you have 4 symbols like the wheel and the jewel and the vajra, the lotus, the jewel, the lotus, and the sword, and so forth. But in other cases, there are actual 5 Buddhas are drawn. What it symbolizes is that when you are enlightened, when your very kind of processes upon which we create our identity, like what are known as the 5 skandhas in Sanskrit, or the 5 aggregates, the 5 processes, basically physical dimension, our sensations, our perceptions, the various reactions or the emotional states, and then something called the primary consciousness. These are the 5 processes upon which we designate or construct identity as me, as a person, I. From the Buddhist point of view, there is nothing that is a fixed I. It is empty. We are empty of having a fixed kind of entity as me. It is only processes constantly changing, but there is a continuum, and then upon those continuum, those processes, we create an identity which changes when you are a child. I'm a child. When you are grown up, you are adult, and we are old. And then also it changes depending on the many other circumstances. But 5 processes or the skandhas are the ones that, when enlightened, all those 5 processes are also, transformed, so that they can manifest as the 5 enlightened forms that are often depicted of what is known as the 5 Buddha families, or the 5, the basic Buddha forms. And these are the ones that there are names for each one of these, like this. For example, you have Ratna Sambhava, that is of the perception transformed. This is the sensation transformed, perception transformed. This is what is known as the composition factor that varies emotional and other mental states. Transform. This is the form aggregate transform. This is the primary consciousness, the Akshobhya. So the 5 Buddha families are therefore, these are not 5 distinct Buddhas, but basically the different enlightened dimension of yourself. In the Tantric Buddhist tradition, when are these mandalas created? They are created usually when a group of students are to be introduced into a practice around the specific deities, specific tantric practice. So therefore, what is called the empowerment, you are introduced through a process known as empowerment by a qualified teacher. So that's why the mandalas are usually created as the kind of physical presence of the enlightened presence. Of course, the master visualizes, and through visualizations, bringing that presence into that created, mandala that you have. And then after you are given empowerment, then the students have to then practice, engage in those meditations to bring about transformation. Those are the yogas with sign, without yoga without sign. Basically, what happens is that once you receive the empowerment, your goal is to attune to the reality. Remember, this is the wisdom. So you cultivate letting go, good heart, and the wisdom realizing reality, emptiness, if you will. In essence, a practitioner, like a novice practitioner into such practice, can, as one relates to that, nothing exists concrete in fixed manner. In a way that one sees that as all dissolving into light and gradually dissolves back into oneself, one's own identity as this physical, all melts into light, and eventually even a speck of light also dissolves into that ultimate reality that is characterized by emptiness and awareness. That is from there. Then you arise. That is the kind of the fabric. Of your whole reality. So you arise in this three-shaped, kind of three-corner shaped, cone-shaped kind of source of reality, and then a lotus, and on top of that, then the whole mansion, and then the central. This is kind of the not proportionally drawn, but but inside, then there will be this 8-petaled lotus on the throne and so forth, moon and sun, and upon which then you, as that non-dual wisdom of emptiness, wisdom that is in one taste with reality, that is you. In qualitatively speaking, there is no difference, your reality and anyone's reality in the ultimate sense, including those who are already enlightened. So therefore, in essence, that when you are using, this is the part of imagination, visualization, that you identify yourself as that non-dual wisdom of emptiness. This is who I am. And then you arise from there as a deity. And that is what is referred to here as, when you arise as, let's say, if I'm one who receives empowerment into the practice of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, then I arise as Avalokiteshvara, and there I learn to identify myself by seeing my physical reality as Avalokiteshvara, as a deity. My environment, where I am, this mansion and the whole environment as the mandala, divine, that is also the extension of the same wisdom of emptiness. Resources, here some words are missing, unfortunately, the different programs kind of distorted. But it simply means that one begins to relate to all the resources, sound, smells, taste, the touch, tangible things, and for that matter, all these resources, not as ordinary sounds and so forth, but in its kind of authentic reality, they are also the nature of the wisdom. So you see that wisdom in reality manifesting as sounds and so forth and so on. So that's why it's in the Tantric Buddhism, it's often referred to that it's the passions are not kind of sort of seen as bad, that you incorporate the world of senses, not by kind of identifying with them as, but rather identify as ordinary things, but in its divine wisdom forms, that they are wisdom in itself. And all activities, whatever you do, bringing this commitment, resolve of compassion, and with the understanding of wisdom, who you are, therefore that what you do, that the activities are to help other beings through those 5 kind of activities and so forth. Now, just to kind of give you a sense of here, maybe we need to use this. A meditator, when he or she is meditating, they are not, looking at the mandala as 3-dimensional, as a painting or like that, but rather oneself in the center of such, or in some cases in the front, the mandalas are seen in the 3-dimensional form. This is a very rudimentary form of digital mandala, but it will give you a sense of, when someone is meditating, their visualization of the mandalas. So that's all happening in his head, this monk's head. So, with that, when you go back to see the mandala, that it probably, I hope that this gives you a different sense of how to look at the mandala with a three-dimensional, point of view. So, with that, I conclude my talk here. I think it's 4 o'clock. We may have gone already finished time. But if you have a question, a quick question or two, maybe we can do that. If you are in a hurry, please feel free to leave. But if you have a question, 1 or 2 questions we can take.
It's a little confusing in the abstract to somebody.
Let me get this for you so people
Oh, but basically the way these are used is the monks are very, very familiar with the symbolism. And then what they see is very different from what I, as an untutored person, would see. I mean, as they're creating it, are they getting deeper, or do they create it for other people, or they do both?
No, that's a really good question. It's true, like when they use these symbols for meditation purpose, obviously that they will have that background understanding for an uninformed audience. Of course, this is mostly to see the aesthetic kind of art form. But in Buddhist tradition, it is believed that you can have these art forms not only for you to engage in kind of meditation purpose, but these are created also at times of certain crises, certain imbalances, certain difficulties, as a way to bring about healing and purifications and like that. And in the scriptures, it's said that even by seeing this as an art form without understanding, that one can receive the transformative benefits. It says actually that even looking at it with an evil eye, not necessarily appreciating it, just looking at it, that you can have it, it could have positive impact on the viewer. But the monks create this as a way of kind of promoting healing, and the peace. So so it has various purposes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of late. Nothing makes sense in the day, but yeah. So these kind of have a life of their own.
Sure.
And they have energy of their own that's beyond our comprehension.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to use this?
Yes.
Sit here and have a conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex kind of form of a ritual, if you will, that creating mandala. And in its true sense, this is used for the meditative purpose. But
I'm thinking also, the Russian Orthodox tradition of the icons, that, doing them is a meditative practice. But the result is also felt to be very spiritually potent, to have power. These icons were carried around in times of crisis. Do you understand? I'm just trying to...
Sure, yeah. The people making, creating this can be very kind of spiritually transformative. Yes, certainly. Carl Jung used this concept of mandala for, psychological healings. With this, combining with his, psychological principle of archetypes. So there is a whole Jungian therapy centered around creating mandalas. Yes.
We in the West, brought up with the Judeo-Christian background, tend to associate the term divine with some sort of supreme being. You use the term divine quite a lot. Since Buddhism is a atheistic religion, explain a little bit more how the term divine relates to Buddhism in general and or the Buddha?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that Buddhism is an atheist tradition or not, I think it's a non-theistic tradition. Some people do make a distinction between atheist and non-theistic. In the sense, in Buddhism, there are a lot of deities. That's Manjushri and so forth and so on. But those are not understood as a concrete beings, but rather an enlightened kind of enlightened state or the principles. That Buddha in the Buddhist tradition is one you could call a divine being. Divine in the sense, a being who is free of all the negativities. That a being who is omniscient. That as his or her knowledge is complete and all the qualities have reached that level of perfection and infinite capacity. So in that sense, a divine, sometimes I see it translated, the Tibetan term known as La, that to refer to the not La in the sense of a being who has, or a state that has transcended all the kind of the impurities or the imperfections. So in that sense, Buddhist tradition will say that there are many divine beings. And as I mentioned earlier, that Buddhist tradition sees that each one of us also hold that seed of divinity or the enlightenment, full enlightenment, or the Buddhahood, as it is referred to. But it is true that Buddhist tradition does not have this position that a single entity intentionally, creating the whole universe, but rather Buddhist grounding kind of the principle in Buddhism is what is known as pratitya samutpada, or the dependent origination. That is to say that utter relativity, that is that everything exists in a relation, in context, not as a priori entity. So from that perspective, yes, understanding the full kind of scope of what is ultimate reality for us, from our vantage point of view, when we operate with conceptual mental states, that state sort of transcends, our this ordinary logic and the conceptual mindset. So in that sense, you can say that the enlightened, the divine state, is beyond our ordinary conceptual kind of understanding of the framework. But that's not to say that there is one single entity that creates, like the, so in that sense, it is different from the monotheistic traditions. Yes.
Can you explain the symbolism of the doji and also if there's a bell included in the mandala?
The term dorje is a Tibetan word for what is referred to as Vajra in Sanskrit. Remember that the whole dome was made of those scepters, the Vajras. The meaning of Vajra or dorje in Tibetan or Vajra in Sanskrit, often translated in English as it's the meaning, what's also called in Tibetan michepa, meaning that inseparable nature, inseparability. They got the, so what that means is that that particular symbol, the Vajra, actually it stands for the primordial state of the mind that is characterized by indivisible, features of bliss and wisdom. That so indivisible in the sense the Vajra, the indivisible, has to do with indivisible or the kind of unity of bliss and wisdom of reality. So now in the the mandalas, the bell, are not kind of drawn separately because Vajra itself, it encompasses both what is known as Deva, or the bliss, and the wisdom. Because the bell, often when you use both bell and Vajra, then Vajra stands for the bliss and the bell for the wisdom. But the bell itself, the Vajra itself, is also the symbol for both wisdom and the bliss.
Also, is there a difference between a double doji and a single doji?
Not necessarily. I think that the double Vajra or the Dorje have, in the mandala context, because the whole mansion needs to stand on the Vajra. So, so therefore a cross Vajra, it is called double Vajra or the cross Vajra. So at the hub, which is what you envision quite big, on that is then the mansion is seated. So apart from that purpose, I don't think there is a specific kind of symbolism behind double Vajra. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for spending your precious time. It's such a beautiful day to spend an hour here. Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.